Mr. Bison flips!
Mr. Bison flips! Mr. Bison flips!
Mr. Bison flips!
This video is aiming to explore Act 2, Scene 1 of Measure for Measure. It's quite a long scene, but that's largely because of the rather nonsensical exchange between the lower characters in Elbow and those that he rests. Mainly Pompey in this case. The scene continues the moral dispute about what's right and what's wrong and justice through the example of Claudio and whether he deserves to be put to death and what is the effect on the people if we don't measure out the punishment that we've assigned. And Angelo starts the scene off by explaining that very thing, where he says, we must not make a scarecrow of the law. So he's setting up this metaphor of a scarecrow that we we put a brand new scarecrow out in the field, and initially it's scaring off the birds of prey, but then if we keep it in one shape, we leave it the way it is, then eventually custom's going to make it their perch and not their terror, and the birds will come back and they will sit on the scarecrow and they won't be frightened of it at all. And that's obviously currently what the state is in Vienna. No one fears the laws about promiscuity and about other misconducts, and therefore Angelo feels he needs to not only set up the scarecrow but let it actually carry out its case so that people learn to fear the law once again. And obviously Claudio is going to be the one who has to be that example. Whereas obviously this is contrasted by Aeschylus, who says that maybe we should just try to be a bit more measured in our approach and just cut a little, then fall and bruise to death. So we don't need to take such an extreme step straight away. This gentleman, and he starts arguing Claudius' case again, whom I would say had a most noble father and great virtues in him. And he even goes so far as to say that in your own affections, had the time cohered with place, or place with wishing, or the acting of your blood, your own purpose could have ended up putting you in sort of example, and you would have been under the censure of him and pulled the law upon you. So in fact, the roles might have been reversed, and Angelo could have been the one in the victim's booth. And Angelo acknowledges that this might very well be the case. But he's saying that 'tis one thing to be tempted, Aeschylus, another thing to fall, and that's the flaw in Claudio. He has fallen, he has acted on his urge, and taken Juliet into his bed in what Angelo perceives as a premature time. But he also, he does acknowledge that this might be a case of when we set up a jury, the jury might, in fact, have amongst the sworn 12 a thief or two that are guiltier than him they try. So he's not saying people are perfect, but when we find the jewel that we find, we stoop and take it. So in this case, I've caught Claudio in the act. I need to act upon this because I need to assert the power of my scarecrow. Because if those that we don't see, the jewels that we don't see that are buried beneath our feet, we obviously ignore completely. So all the other things that I don't know about, I'm not going to act upon, but this one I am well aware of, and I'm going to use it. And he puts this without any doubt in the very end, because he's saying those that we do not know, we tread upon and never think of, because we were unaware of those offences. But, sir, he must die, because I'm aware of his crime. To cement this, Angelo turns to the provost and says, see that Claudio be executed at 9 tomorrow morning. Bring him his confessor, let him be prepared, for that's the outmost of the pilgrimage. As the provost exits on those order. And Aeschylus, obviously, though, he concedes that he has to obey and do what Angelo tells him, because he has all the power of the Duke. There's still reluctance in him, and we see that through the aside where he turns to us and says, well, heaven forgive him and forgive us all. Some rise by sin and some by virtue fall. So he's almost seeing Claudio as virtuous in this, and he's not even condemning him in the least for what he's done, because he obviously sees them more as being fully married. And he realizes that in our society, some people even rise by sin. And I'm not. It is a bit ambiguous here whether or not he's saying that Angelo himself is sinful and he's gained his power through sin. He could certainly pass that statement at the end of the play and have that attested. So, having finished that speech by Aeschylus, in comes Elbow, the constable, and other officers with Froth and Pompey, who've just been arrested. And obviously, their main role here is to act as comic relief. They play to the groundlings. They engage the lower, less educated people in the audience. But it's also revealing some double standards here, which is quite interesting, as these people, even though they're meant to be the lower class in society, are actually, as we find out later, more moral than Angelo is. They're not. They are who they say they are. They follow through on whatever they say. And they're more realistic in a sense. And also they have a good sense of what actually goes on in Vienna. And we'll see that in the very last... Well, we're going to skip a few pages ahead here. But Pompey leaves Aeschylus with a few wise words before he departs. Or very realistic words, at least. So if you turn 3 or 4 pages ahead, depending on what edition you're working from, as Aeschylus is getting ready, so Angelo's left already because he didn't want to deal with this gibberish that really the conversation has been, but rather Aeschylus is left to do, and just before he sends Pompey on his way, he's sort of saying, well, if the law is forcing us to restore order, and all we can do is act upon it. So Pompey then asks, does your worship mean to geld and splay all of the youth in the city? So he's essentially saying sexual urges will always be there to contest with. And so the only way to get rid of it would be to geld everyone, because if you're going to close down all the whorehouses and you're going to make it impossible for men to satisfy those urges, then the society is just not going to function. Pompey then tries to point out that if you deal with people at the other end, if you deal with the prostitutes and you deal with their customers, then the boards in the middle are not going to constitute a problem per se. And Aeschylus says, well, they're pretty orders indeed. I can tell you already, they're going to be either beheaded or hung. Pompey then draws the conclusion that if you head and hang all that offends that way, but for 10 years together you'll be glad to give out a commission for more heads. If this law hold in Vienna for 10 years, I'll rent the fairest house in it after 3 pence a bay. If you live to see this come to pass, say, Pompey told you so. So he's sort of looking into the future, saying that you're not going to be able to control society in this way. And in fact, if you're going to start executing people for these crimes, then in the end, you're not going to have any population left. I think it's going too far to say that Pompey is right or has the moral upper hand here, but he does make a good point, and it is worth thinking about this point in that whole conversation about right and wrong and the whole scarecrow example that Angelo brings up. We're not going to skip to the very end of the scene where Pompey and everyone else has left, and the Aeschylus is just having his final words with the provost. So Aeschylus here starts saying that, again, he grieves him for the death of Claudio, but there's no remedy. There's no way around this. Angelo's made up his mind. It's locked in for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And the justice, or the provost, perceives that, Lord Angelo is severe. But Aeschylus does, again, defend him and says it is but needful. Mercy is not itself that oft looks so. Pardon is still the nurse of second woe. So that rhyming couplet kind of summarizes why he's backing up Angelo, and obviously also backing up the Duke in this case. Because if we are too merciful, then people will still continue to sin or misbehave in various ways. So he sees the need, the necessity for taking action. And that couplet concludes Act 2, Scene 1, and we then move on to Scene 2.